If y'all are like me, you had a good lunch. I'm ready for a nap now, though. So we'll have to stay awake. Just wanted to make you aware of one thing. In the Archdiocese of Louisville, probably a couple of years ago now, we wanted to put together a history of the women of the diaconate, what they've done and how they've contributed to the diaconate. And we wanted to do that because, like many dioceses, the folks that started the diaconate and were in on the planning are getting older, and a number of those have died. So we wanted to capture that while we still had the folks around that knew what was going on when the diaconate began in the Archdiocese. So as we had a very core group, handful of wives that started this, and as they began to gather information, we didn't just want to list this happened in this year or this time, this time, this time, this time. We want to make it pretty comprehensive. And as they looked at that, they said, we can't just do one of the wives because we're so intertwined, the deacon and the spouse, that it's got to be about the whole diaconate. So we approached the Archbishop. He said, that sounds like a great idea. So they proceeded on and came up with the history of the diaconate for the Archdiocese of Louisville. Did a lot of tremendous work and a lot of digging and pictures and interviews and talks at retreats and all of those kinds of things. And we came up with a very nice history of the diaconate of the Archdiocese. These are available out in the hallway for $15. And we're thinking other dioceses might want to look at doing the same type of thing. If you'd be interested in these, I say they're available out in the hallway, $15. And that's what it costs to print it, basically, is what you got here is $15. We make nothing off of it. But if you want to browse through it, look through it, whatever, some great stories in there of the people in the diaconate, both from the very founding up to the last class that was ordained. So if you get a chance, stop by, take a look at it, browse through it. And if you'd be interested, be glad to sell you one then. There's some order forms. If you'd like to go home, think about it. Check maybe with your diaconate office or in the Archdiocese. See if they'd be interested in that as well. So just want to make you aware of it. Those that have gotten one, look through it and say, hey, this is great. Haven't seen anything like this. So we encourage you maybe to think of the same thing for your own diocese, to start putting that history together if you don't already have it. So I say some of us are getting older. There's some faces here that have been, faces not here, that have been here before that have gone to the Lord. So we need to get as much information from them as we have and capture that, because it's a wealth of value and wisdom for the deacon communities around our nation. So thank you for considering. Have a good NDICE. And all those with the orange dots, we're glad you're here. If you got any questions, we'd be glad to answer them and help you out. Have a good afternoon.
I said something to Hank, and he told me to remind him, so I just want to make the announcement. I'm a van driver, and a lot of people are walking down through the center and picking up a ride down there. If you don't know, you can go right up these steps or ride an elevator, and that's where we park the golf carts. So if you're having trouble getting to and from, don't forget to do that. Also, if you need a ride in the parking lot, we don't know. So if you'd like, I'll give you my phone number. If you're ready to take it, my cell phone, you can call me, and we'll come pick you up in the parking lot. Anybody want it? Okay, area code 502. I think I remember Joe's one. I don't know. No, mine. 387-7592. 502-387-7592. Don't call after midnight.
Jerry. Oh, Lord have mercy. The Uber deacon. So Lisa Anslinger is the co-director of Catholic Life and Faith, a pastoral resource center supporting parish and diocesan evangelization and stewardship leaders. The mission of Catholic Life and Faith is to form leaders to engage people as disciples of Jesus Christ. Lisa brings extensive experience in Catholic parishes and schools to her ministry as an author and speaker. She contributes a regular column in Catechetical Leader and in the e-newsletter published by the International Catholic Stewardship Council, and is the author of books and numerous e-resources for catechesis and stewardship. Lisa develops and provides resources, pastoral support, and presentations on stewardship, strengths, development, engagement, and evangelization to dioceses, parishes, and schools all over the country. So please welcome my friend, Miss Lisa Anslinger.
Thank you all so much. It is wonderful to be with you here today. I actually live in Cincinnati, so I didn't have to travel to be with you, but I know most of you had to travel to get here, and so I'm very grateful that we have this opportunity to be together, to think about building bridges to the heart of the family. And I wanted to sort of begin by saying, I think that what leads us to be here together is really a desire. It's a desire to draw people to Jesus Christ through our parish communities, leading them to live as disciples. I think that's the thing that brings us, all of us, together. And of course, you have very special roles to play in that process of evangelization, of leading people to Christ, or more deeply to Christ, through the body of Christ, through all of us being members of Christ's body together. As I was preparing in a special way for this afternoon, I was struck by something that St. John Paul II said in his beautiful letter on the family. He said, "Thus the little domestic church, like the greater church, needs to be constantly and intensely evangelized. Hence its duty regarding permanent education in the faith. The family, like the church, ought to be a place where the gospel is transmitted and from which the gospel radiates. The future of evangelization depends in great part on the church of the home." What a beautiful vision for all of us about the importance of the family. And we're going to hold that vision out in front of us throughout our time together this afternoon. So with that in mind, I'd actually like to invite you to have a conversation at your tables. But here's the thing. I know, and you know, that once you start talking, you're not going to want to stop, right? And really, I believe that the conversations that we have at events like this really are part of the experience, yes? Because it gives us that opportunity to widen our view and to hear from one another, and actually to be supported by one another in the ministry that we are a part of. So, the one ground rule that we're going to have during this time is, when I say it's time to come back, it's time to come back. Got it? So here's my yes, Mother. Yeah, I am the mom of two and the grandmother of one, so I do bring that to this as well. So here's what I'd like to invite you to talk about for about 7 minutes. What are your hopes and dreams for the parents and families of your parish communities? And what do you hear from them? What hopes and dreams and needs do they share? Now, that's a lot to talk about in 7 minutes. So if it's easier for you to have your conversation in 2s and 3s rather than at the whole table, feel free to do that. What are your hopes and dreams for the families that you serve? And what are the hopes and dreams of the families that you hear from them? Have a conversation, and I'll call you back in about 7 minutes. That was a quick 7 minutes, wasn't it? Yeah. So much to consider when we think about families. So many hopes and dreams for the families in our parishes and for the ones who aren't with us. We'll continue the conversation throughout our time together this afternoon. But as we begin to think about this together, I wanted to share with you some things that a friend of mine has shared about her family, specifically about her young sons, who are now, I think, 10 or 11, twin boys, Nick and Zach. And when Nick and Zach were, I think, maybe about 5, their mom, Marcy, started posting things on Facebook that she calls things you don't expect to hear from the back seat. You've got the picture, right? Yeah. And you can imagine these 2 twin boys. Of course, they're like yin and yang sometimes, I think. And they're very precocious young men. And so they've shared things over the years. And then that little kind of posting on Facebook sort of morphed into just things that were happening in the life of their family. Things like this. Marcy says to them as they're heading to confession one afternoon, you know, I feel like I confess the same sins over and over again. And one of the boys says, well, yeah, Mom, that's why I go to a different priest each time. Can't make it up, right? One Sunday, they got to Mass in time to sort of start looking at the missalette. And she says, do you know that if you went to Mass every single day for 3 years, you would hear the whole Bible? And Nick says, wow, that's really amazing. And Zach says, yeah, it is. But, Mom, if you decide to do that, you can leave us at Nana's for the next 3 years, okay? But I have to tell you, my favorite of all was one that she posted years ago, where she overheard the 2 boys talking. And one of the boys said, I don't think God ever ignores. And the other one responded, no, but he sure is shy about talking sometimes. Yeah. And I think that's a lot of what we need to be thinking about. How do we help our families of all ages, of all descriptions? How do we help them to hear the voice of the Lord and to respond to the grace of God with and in their lives? I think that's some of what we need to be thinking about in this time where we think about building bridges to our families. There's a recent study on the family that was sponsored by Holy Cross Family Ministries, and I wanted to share this with you. I've got the web address there at the bottom of the screen. It's HCFM for Holy Cross Family Ministries, hcfm.org. And then there's a link on their homepage to their family research, or you can just put / in family research. I'll be sharing a little bit from that study with you throughout this time, but I think it's important for us to know that about 79% of Catholic parents are married, and they're looking at families with children 18 and under. Okay? Now, of course, our families are much older than that as well, but this gives us a little bit of insight into our younger families especially. About 76% of those people who are parents who are married have a Catholic spouse. And that's important for us to keep in mind, that, 25% or so, and of course varying in different degrees in our parishes, but we've got a good number of non-Catholic parents who are with us as well. About 13% are unmarried and living with a partner. About 4% are divorced. About 3% are parents who are single and were never married. And about 1% are widowed. So that gives us a little bit of an image of what we're talking about, at least in terms of younger families. That differs a bit from the United States overall numbers, where about 61% are married, 46% are in first marriage. This is current as of 2014. Two parents in a remarriage situation are about 15% nationally. About 7% are cohabiting. About 26% nationally are single parents. And then about 5% of children in the U.S. do not have parents. They're in foster situations or are hopefully in an hopeful adoptive situation. So we have a lot to consider just among younger families, and then we think about, the variations as families get older. I mentioned that I am now a grandmother, and boy, has that ever changed my life. Yeah. And, all my friends kept saying, oh, it's so different being the grandparent. I kept going, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a whole different thing. And it's not just because I get to send him home at the end of the visit. But it is. It's a very blessed state of life. But here's the thing. Even with that little glimpse, we all know that we can't capture the real realities of family life in a bunch of statistics. And we also know that a good number of people, especially younger adults, aren't with us regularly. We need to be thinking about them as well. I'd like to share just a little bit of that with you because I think it's important for our conversation about families. We know that, the trend is, particularly among younger adults, but not solely among younger adults, a move away from, and it isn't just Catholicism, it's really all faith traditions. There's a growing number of people who the researchers actually have coined the phrase the nones, N-O-N-E-S. Because on the survey, when asked what denomination are you, they answer none. They're unaffiliated. And among Catholics, while about 1 in 3 Americans were raised Catholic, fewer than 1 in 4 now describe themselves as Catholic. That's important for us to know. It's important for us to know, especially among our younger adults, that, many of us in our growing up years, our peers, perhaps a few of us in this room, left for a while and then came back for marriage or for the baptism of a first child or maybe through a funeral of a parent or family member. That is not happening to the same extent among younger adults today. The ones who leave, many of them are staying gone. They're not returning. So we need to think about that. We also know that within our parishes, including the members of the various kinds of families that we have, are people who consider themselves spiritual but not religious. You've heard that term? Yeah. I was asked a few years ago for the International Catholic Stewardship Conference to talk about the spiritual but not religious and how we might think about engaging them as well as the unaffiliated, the nuns. And so I'd like to just do a real quick show of hands. True or false? What do you think? The spiritual but not religious are not members of congregations. How many of you would say that's true? Yeah, surprisingly not. That is actually a false statement. The majority of people who consider themselves spiritual but not religious are actually in our pews. About 20% of Catholics nationally consider themselves spiritual but not religious, which means a number of the families that we're serving of all ages, including those families of children who are young, who are in our religious education programs and our schools and going through sacramental prep, are among the people who consider themselves spiritual but not religious. Let's try this one. Most people who identify themselves as spiritual but not religious do not believe in God. How many would say that's true? Yeah, that's kind of a giveaway question, isn't it? Yeah. But it is interesting, because, and we're going to think about this a little bit more deeply later. We know that each of us has been created with a hunger for God. Years ago, I heard a person who at the time was with Renew International, Sister Cheryl Erb, and she was doing a training. And she said, people are thirsty for our Lord. And Jesus tells us that we're the salt of the earth. And so maybe part of what we need to be doing is adding some salt to that thirst so that people will recognize it. Yeah, I think that's a bit of what we need to be thinking about as we build bridges. Pardon? You sure may. Yeah. Okay. Say more.
Well, what I was going to say is that whenever someone finds out a deacon and they're a young person,
Yes.
sometimes without me even asking, they say, "Oh, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious."
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if I understood your question. I know that's not scientific,
Right.
but I mean, so many young kids are only.
Yes, absolutely. That's what I'm saying.
That was what that statement.
Yes. Yes. No, I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah, it's not a majority at this point, but it is a goodly portion of the people that are in our parishes. And I think it helps for us to recognize that. Again, I will suggest, and toward the end of our time, I'm going to actually give you a web address where you can go and download a file that has live links to a number of the studies that I'm referring to, so that you'll be able to read all of this yourself. Because one of the things that I think we need to keep in mind is our younger adults are tending to be a bit suspicious of all institutions. And that includes the church. It isn't only the church, but it's something that we need to be aware of. Those who are not religiously affiliated are found among younger adults. Yes, and. It isn't only younger adults, but this is a situation that we need to be aware of, especially as we think about building bridges to our families and our younger families. Here's a question for you. How many of you would say true to this? The unaffiliated are a stable yet growing segment of the population. How many would say that's true? Okay, here's the interesting thing. That's also a false statement, but again, it's a both and. They're actually not a stable group, and I'll describe that in a few minutes as well. I think it's helpful for us to know. So just a little bit about these two groups of people, and then we're going to start applying this to family life and thinking about how we might build bridges to our families. The spiritual but not religious are more common among women than men, more common among younger adults. The majority are religiously affiliated, up to about 60% of those who consider themselves spiritual but not religious are religiously affiliated. The unaffiliated, the ones who do not belong to a congregation, are upwards of 30% of younger adults under the age of 30. That's a lot. That's a lot of our younger adults. Now, I would suggest that the things that we're going to be thinking about in terms of building bridges to all of these people is that what's good for the younger adults is good for everyone. I know Amy McEntee is going to be with you tomorrow to help you to think specifically a little bit more about younger adults. And she and I did not have the opportunity to talk about this together. But I would suggest that the things that we're thinking about, while in large part some of the facts that I'm throwing out are all in relationship to younger adults, this really applies to everyone. But here's something that we need to be aware of. First of all, there are a number of, in fact, the majority of those who were born and raised Catholic remain Catholic, 68% or thereabouts. So we need to be mindful of them. We need to be evangelizing all of the people who are already with us. And we'll think about that in a number of different ways. But we also need to know that of those who leave, the majority do so before age 24. So we need to be really mindful of the ways in which we evangelize our younger families, parents, teens, children, because we have that blessed moment in which we have the opportunity to build a bridge to them. And I think it's really important that we recognize that need to evangelize the parents while we have the children with us. There's a wonderful series of studies that have been led by a sociologist from the University of Notre Dame whose name is Christian Smith. And Dr. Smith has written a number of books about the studies that they're doing with teens and emerging adults. About 15 or more years ago now, Dr. Smith and his team of sociologists published a series of reports about the surveys that they were doing and focus groups and interviews with teens. And at that time, the teenagers essentially said to these sociologists, in, of course, many, many, many more words than this, if my parents drop me off at church and then they leave and they think that somehow something magic's going to happen and I'm going to stay, no, that's not going to happen. And I think for many of us, it was a wake-up call that as important as it is to have outreach and religious education and youth ministry for our families, it's also really important for us to engage the parents. Now, Dr. Smith and his team have gone back to those same people now in their young adult years. And they've done additional surveys and focus groups and so on with them, the same young people. And here's a little of what they found. Among the younger adults who have stayed, they continue to say that their parents are extremely important, but they also point to the importance of the faith community, of other adults who are living their faith in wonderful ways. And they're saying that it's a both and, that we need to witness to the importance of our faith in our lives in order for our young people to really grasp the fact that this is a compelling and meaningful way of life. They go on to say that those younger adults who are staying are young adults who have learned to pray every day. That prayer has become a big part of their lives, including and especially prayer with the Bible. That's really important to the way in which they make those connections, especially between Mass and the rest of their lives. They also are people who have themselves or know someone who has experienced something of the miraculous. We need to be witnessing to our young people that God is living and active in our lives and help them to recognize the presence of God in order for them to really take this on as their way of life as they are maturing. I had the opportunity to hear Dr. Smith speak a number of years ago now as he was first publishing this second study. And he said the other thing that's important for us to know is that, there are a number of young parents who are saying in more or fewer words something kind of like this: I don't know if I believe everything that I was taught. I don't know if I really believe that it's important to go to Mass every single Sunday. But I do know that I want my children to be given what I was given. And so they're placing their children in religious education to a great extent, up to about the point of confirmation. And then they're hoping that their children will make the decision to continue. So we have this evangelizing opportunity with our younger families. We We have an evangelizing opportunity with the people who are with us. And through them, we have the opportunity to evangelize the ones who are not. Now, I mentioned that thing about the unaffiliated are a stable yet growing population. They're actually not stable. Because here's the thing. We now have a second or third generation of younger adults who grew up in a house where regular faith attendance was not part of their lives. They grew up in unaffiliated homes. They maybe came to church at Christmas and Easter and so on. And many of those younger adults, as they mature, are beginning to come to us. And they're saying things like, I looked at my friends who went to church every weekend, and I really kind of wondered if I wasn't missing out on something. And I always wondered and felt like I want what they have. And so the unaffiliated is not a stable group because we have people who are now coming or coming back, perhaps having never been with us before, or perhaps returning after some time away. Among those who were raised in unaffiliated homes, those who come to us say they're attracted by a life of worship. They feel called by God, and they have felt spiritually unfulfilled. So, going back to that Holy Cross study, a couple of additional things that we can learn and draw on for our time together here. Many of the parents, in fact, the majority of parents, over 70% of them said they pray. The prayer is an essential part of their faith. But interestingly, many of them do not pray with their children. They say they pray for them. Yeah. I know as a director of faith formation, which I was for over a dozen years, every year when we talked with our younger families about what would be helpful for you, we offered regular family formation and intergenerational faith formation and adult faith formation. And every year as the families were registering for the coming year of religious education, we asked them, what would be helpful for you? And every single year at the top of the list was, we need more on prayer. We know that prayer is important, but we don't know how to pray. The disciples asked Jesus, teach us to pray. And that is a great need still for our families. And our families need to be encouraged to pray with their children as well as for their children. That's an important thing that we can give them. About 63% of the parents that were surveyed in this Holy Cross study say that they attend Mass more than twice a month. 22% rarely or never attend. My guess, and probably yours, is that number might be a little bit higher. I think that might be wishful thinking on the part of some. 68% of families with children do not have their children enrolled in religious ed. 68%. About 93% are still bringing them for sacramental prep. So again, we've got those opportunities to engage the families. So I think what we can see from all of that is we have two interrelated dynamics. We need to be evangelizing families, and sometimes it's going to be through the children that we evangelize the parents, right? We need to build up that domestic church that St. John Paul spoke so lovingly of. And we're going to do that through our communities of faith, through our parish families. It's interesting. I've watched my young children, my young adult children. Our daughter's 26, our son is 33. And both of them have gotten married in the last 2.5 years. It's been a crazy time for our family. And I watched our children bringing the love of their life to the first family gatherings. You know that? You know that awkward time? Some of us remember that awkward time all too well, or we've experienced it with our own adult children. You know, and I watched Mike. I was so conscious of this when our son brought his now wife, Wendy, to the first family reunion. Mike lives in Denver, so we don't get to see him as often, and I know that he was nervous about kind of bringing Wendy into this crazy, mixed-up family. And I watched him. And he didn't just say, hey, everybody, here's Wendy. Wendy, here's the family, and off he went. He took Wendy person to person and cluster to cluster. He told her stories. He told her how one Father's Day family reunion, his dad, my husband, dropped the chicken on the way from the grill to the dinner table. Yeah, that's really bad. And therefore, a rubber chicken does appear every year at the family reunion. Yeah. He told Wendy about Grandma and Grandpa and how they used to every summer do a week at a park in a cabin, and that was part of his favorite things about the family. And then eventually he did leave for a few minutes and said, you know, I'm going to go get something to drink and eat. Would you like me to bring you something? And he left her for a few minutes. And I think about that a lot when I think about the ways in which we draw people into our faith family. Because I think sometimes we focus on how to get people with us, but we don't think about how we're really engaging them in a way that will help them to feel at home with Christ, at home with the Christian family. And that's what I'd like for us to think about a little bit as we think together about building bridges to our families. I've become very interested in and convinced that there is some wisdom in a body of research that some of you are probably familiar with that's been done by the Gallup organization. We know Gallup as the people who do the Gallup poll, but it turns out that really is just a small part of what they do. A lot of Gallup's work is around helping organizations to be better at what they do. And they have a lot of research for faith communities on the ways in which we can engage people through the life of the parish. And in fact, what the research shows is that in most cases, belonging within the parish makes a difference in the way in which we live our lives of faith. What the research actually shows is that when people have a deep rootedness in the life of the faith community, what they call engagement, when people are engaged, they're more likely to say that they pray every day. They're more likely to forgive others when they've been hurt. They're more likely to take a stand on account of their faith, even when it's unpopular to do so. They're more likely to invite others, so they become part of that evangelization outreach. They become bridge builders. They're more likely to give of their time. They're more likely to give of their resources. They're more likely to be thankful people who are satisfied with the circumstances of their lives, no matter what those circumstances might be. My guess is you all know people like that. You can see their faces as I'm describing those engaged people. In fact, I always think of a friend of mine, Jennifer. Jennifer and her family had moved a couple of times by the time they arrived at my parish. And at one point, they almost had to move again. And they kept talking not about how they didn't want to leave Cincinnati or the children's schools because the children were young at the time. All they could say is how much they didn't want to leave the parish, because they knew the impact of the parish in the way in which they were living and growing in faith. So Jennifer was one who, I'd say probably about once a month, someone would call and say, Jennifer told me to call. Jennifer said, if you don't know the answer to the question, you'll know somebody who does. Or even more likely, the friend would come, arm in tow, and the friend would go, I don't know why, but she just wouldn't give up. You know people like that? Yeah. They know the importance of the faith family in their lives of faith, and they want that for their friends and neighbors. In fact, Jennifer and Tim, her husband, had for a long while lived in Texas. We have any Texans here? Yeah, and they had learned a lot from their Texan brothers and sisters. And so when the moving van would show up on Jennifer's street, she'd go bake a batch of cookies, and she would take it to the door. And she'd say, hi, I'm Jennifer. I'm one of your neighbors. I'm wondering, do you happen to be Catholic? I'm not making this up. And I have to tell you, from Jennifer, we really thought about that. We thought about all the people who lived in neighborhoods that didn't have a Jennifer. And so we started following the local housing transfer lists. And we sent a letter under our pastor's signature to every person who moved within our parish boundaries. And we said, welcome to the neighborhood. If you're Catholic, we'd like to invite you to come join us. And if you're not Catholic, give us a call and we'll help you find your church home. I can't tell you how many people came and said, I've never gotten a letter like this before. And we learned that from Jennifer. Jennifer was engaged. But as I'm sure all of you are thinking right now, that group of engaged families is actually pretty small. I'll share with you in a little while just how small. The majority of families are actually not engaged. And here's the important thing to know about the not engaged. They're not negative. They're really just waiting for one of us to build that bridge. They're waiting for one of us to draw them in. Probably in a little way at first. Put that toe in. The not engaged are not negative, but they're less likely to invite, and they're more likely to leave. They're the ones that just kind of drift away. Sometimes for a reason. You know, they get to a point where they don't agree with what the church teaches, or sometimes someone kind of makes them angry. But much more often, they just stop coming. And then there's a third group of people. And the third group of people are called the actively disengaged. That paints a picture, doesn't it? Yeah. And actually, the actively disengaged come in two different forms. Some of those people are the ones that maybe came to mind. They're the ones that a friend of mine calls the flower people, because they only come to church when there are flowers. Christmas, Easter, weddings, baptisms, funerals, first communions. That kind of covers it, right? Yeah. But there's also a group of actively disengaged people that are with us all the time, and they're always complaining. Yeah, we all have some of those people. They're the cave dwellers. They're consistently against virtually everything. I didn't make that up. I wish I had. It's actually in the Gallup book that kind of reports all of this study. But here's the thing we need to remember, and we're going to hold on to this as we think about how to build bridges to all of these people. What the research really shows us is this. It's the engaged. It's the ones that have that deep belonging. It's you and I and the people that we know by name and by face who are going to build bridges to the not engaged. We're the bridge builders. The actively disengaged will come in God's time, probably by way of the invitation or witness of someone who is right now not engaged. That's the pattern. And so we really need to think about who we are called to be as builders of bridges, and how we engage the people that we know, that we touch, that we have the opportunity to engage, because it's they who are going to go build those bridges beyond us. That's how the pattern works. You know, Pope Francis in The Joy of the Gospel, in Amoris Laetitia says, this effort of evangelizing families calls for missionary conversion by everyone in the church. That is, one that is not content to proclaim a merely theoretical message without connection to people's real problems. Pastoral care for families needs to make it clear that the gospel of the family responds to the deepest expectations of the human person, a response to each one's dignity and fulfillment in reciprocity, communion, and fruitfulness. This consists not merely in presenting a set of rules, but in proposing values that are clearly needed today, even in the most secularized of countries. That's a lot for us to think about. How do we build bridges to our families, knowing that there's so much that happens around us that's counter to what we know and believe to be the most important in life? And how are we going to do that in a way that really respects and values each person as a child of God? And as those families, as the domestic church, how do we help all of that to happen? What I'd like to suggest is, this is grand oversimplification, but I think there are three primary things that people are looking for. And that's what I'd like for us to think about. Then we're going to take a brief break. And when we come back, we're going to think about what does this say to all of us who are builders of bridges, and especially you who are deacons and your wives who are here and all of the people that you interact with. So I'd like to suggest three things that people seek. The first of those we've already alluded to, and that's a spiritual dimension. Each of us has that inborn hunger for God. And we know that people are recognizing that need for the spiritual dimension in their lives. If you can find a bookstore still, or if you go online and just search spirituality, you're going to find hundreds and thousands of titles around spirituality, right? So there's that hunger for God. I love this. David Kinnaman, who is the president of the Barna Group. Barna does a lot of research around younger adults, and younger adult spirituality says they, meaning younger adults, see spirituality is connected to all of their life, not a compartment within their life. We need bridges between Monday to Friday and Sunday. How do we make those connections? Those of you who provide the homily have an incredible opportunity when you preach to build that bridge. Those of you who interact with families at parish gatherings, serving side by side, doing marriage prep and baptism prep and all of the things that you do, you have a lot of opportunity to build that bridge between Monday to Friday and Sunday. What an amazing opportunity to evangelize our families, no matter the state of the family, and especially in that moment when the family needs it the most. I was doing a retreat for a college campus ministry group just a couple of years ago, and something that I said triggered something in one of the young men. I didn't know it at the time. But the following day, the priest who was the chaplain kind of disappeared for a little while. And I thought he was probably getting ready for Saturday evening liturgy. It didn't occur to me that there was something else going on behind the scenes. And so later that evening, as a bunch of us were out to dinner, Father said to me, "Do you know the man that you were talking with yesterday?" And I said, "Yeah, I kind of remember him." And he said, "Well, here's what happened today." He said he appeared at lunchtime and motioned me out into the hall, and he had with him his brother and his father. And he said, "Can we talk?" And of course, Father said yes, and they left. And it turned out the younger brother was in the throes of chemical addiction. And the older brother, and something that happened during that Friday evening retreat time, something clicked that he realized that if anything was going to change with his brother, he had to be part of initiating that help. And so he asked his brother and his father to come to talk with Father John. And so they sat down together and really did sort of a mini intervention right then and there. We never know when that bridge can be built. But we have a lot of opportunity to address that spiritual dimension, that spiritual need that people have in their lives. They also need a personal connection. And that's echoed in so many ways in that Gallup research. But I want to share with you something else that I've learned just in the last few years. One of the interesting things about the Gallup research is that it says at the very foundation of building this sense of engagement is that people need to know what is expected of them. In other words, what does it mean to belong here? What does it mean to be a part of this faith community? What does it mean to be a Christian disciple? People need to have a sense of the common expectations. And then secondly, they need to know that their spiritual needs will be met. And I often think it's very interesting because, in any relationship, whether it's with a single person or whether it's in community, there are always going to be expectations and needs, right? The fascinating thing to me is that a lot of the other studies that have been done by the Pew Forum and Barna and other organizations also point to that thing about meeting people's spiritual needs. But as Catholics, we really struggle with this, don't we? Because we think about the Mass, the Eucharist, our sacramental life, and it's mind-boggling to us that people can say in the midst of all of that, I didn't feel my spiritual needs were being met. That just mystifies many of us. And I've had conversations with people about this now for over 10 years. So a few years ago, I actually created a spiritual needs survey, something that we can give our people to learn about this, so that hopefully we can think about how we can build those bridges. And in a little while, when I give you the web addresses, I'll show you where you can connect to the spiritual needs survey. You can take it yourself. You can download a copy. You can give it to your people. If you decide to give it to your people, let me know. I'll add your parish name to the list, and then I can give you a report of how your people responded. It's free. I just want us to know how we can best reach our people. I want to share with you just a little of what I've learned. Among the over 4,700 people that have responded to the survey to date, now this is not a random survey like Pew or Barna or Gallup does. This is more like a great big overgrown focus group, but it's a big one at this point. About half of the people say that they have deep faith that shapes their life. And about 44% say they have faith that needs strengthening. Now, that in and of itself, I don't think is a real surprise. I think at any given day, we could answer either way, right? So that's not particularly surprising. But what follows perhaps is, among those who have taken the survey, one of the questions that I ask is simply, what helps you grow spiritually? One of the things that I learned from the people at Gallup years ago is if you want to know the answer to a question, ask it, for heaven's sakes. So what helps you grow spiritually? I give people 14 different responses and say, check as many as apply. And of the 14, here are the top 4. In this order for the whole group: participation in Mass. Thanks be to God. But only about 86% even check that. And these are people who are coming to Mass, were motivated enough to go home, go online, and answer a survey. Okay? Daily prayer, belonging to my parish, and having good friends who share their faith with me. Yeah. We know, and we're hearing from the people in our own lives. There's this relationship between communal prayer, personal prayer, and our relationships with each other. Among younger adults, it's Mass, belonging, prayer, good friends. And no surprise, among teenagers, it's good friends. Mass, prayer, belonging. Yeah. But it's those same four, regardless of age, male and female. The next one is also interesting. What helps you find meaning or purpose in life? This one is so consistent. I really want to just write a book called Family, Faith, and Friends. Because those are the three. Family, faith, and friends. That's what helps to give us meaning and purpose in life. In that order, by the way. Years ago, now over 20 years ago, as I was a brand new faith formation director, I asked people, what is it that you're looking for? And I had a number of our young parents say, it feels like the minute we arrive at the parish, our family's split in 5 different directions. We got this for the young ones and this for the teens. And wouldn't it be nice if just once in a while we could all be together? That's what led to our series of family faith formation gatherings. But it was also interesting that when I said to them, so what would that look like? The general response was, well, we don't know. That's why we hired you. You've all had those moments, haven't you? When you go, what does that mean? Right? But we need to think about, how do we support our families? How do we engage our families? In such a way that they're going to make that connection between Monday to Friday and Sunday, or we would say from Sunday to the rest of life. Among those who said they have faith that needs strengthening, I asked another question, and it's this. What would you actually participate in? So not what would you like, but what would you actually do? And I gave them 7 different responses, and they can rank order them. The number 1 response, having a faith mentor. I bet a lot of you are faith mentors. Yeah. I didn't want to say spiritual director. I thought that might be a little off-putting. A lot of people don't know what that is, especially those not engaged people that are with us. But what would it be like to, perhaps during confirmation, say to the sponsors, think of yourself as a mentor in faith? Would anything change? I don't know. Might. What would it be like to have faith mentors for those who are going through marriage preparation? Or those who are going through baptism prep? What would it be like to help each other in whatever way we could to have some guided spiritual conversations with one another? What a difference that could make to build those bridges. The second thing that they say that they would actually do is to go to parish gatherings to explore spiritual life. Again, we've got that spiritual hunger among us. How do we build that bridge? And then thirdly, the opportunity to contribute to the mission of Christ with meaning. Younger adults are motivated to give to a compelling mission or cause. They need to be able to trust the people that they're going to be serving with or that they're going to be giving with. But it's interesting to me, and again, I think what we think of as being good for young adults is good for all of us. I think we spend a lot of time, and as John's introduction said, I do a lot of work with parishes and dioceses that are working around stewardship, that real broad meaning of stewardship, not just the money meaning of stewardship, but all of that. We focus a lot on helping people to recognize the call to give. We help them to realize that they have a need to give. What we don't always do as well, I don't think, is to help them to know what the impact is likely to be on them and on those who receive whatever it is that we're inviting them to give toward. So think about the teenagers that in your communities that go off and do a mission trip. And then when they come back, we invite them to do a little mini witness at the end of Mass. or to write an article for the bulletin or the newsletter. And how many of those young people over the years have said something like, boy, I got so much more than I gave? We all have that experience, don't we? That's what fuels us. We recognize God's grace in service. But yet we don't always think to share. What's the impact? It's interesting. I was given the opportunity years ago to do a workshop at the Los Angeles Religious Ed Congress. And I was sharing a lot of these ideas at that time. And I talked about the impact or the potential impact and how people need to know that their spiritual needs are going to be met when they engage in the life of Christ and in the life of the parish community. And a younger adult raised his hand and he said, can I say something about that? And I said, sure. And he said, I was gone for a while. I just stopped going to church. It was easier to sleep in on Sundays and kind of tell myself that I'd had a busy week. But there was something that wouldn't let me go. He said, now I would say it was Jesus who wouldn't let me go. And so I started thinking about coming back. And he said, but at the time it felt so selfish. But I kept thinking, but I need to know what's going to happen in my life as a result of this. Because I'm not going to just come back and go through the motions. And he said, and now you're telling me that's normal. Absolutely, it is. And so I think one of the many things that we can think about is how do we help people to recognize and know what the potential impact will be on the receiver and on them as the giver. Christ asks us to serve. Christ commands us to serve. You are men and women of service. How do we invite people into that in such a way that they know that in the midst of that, something's going to happen to them that we know helps us to be disciples of our Lord and to find meaning in our lives. And so when we come back from the brief break that we're going to take, we're going to start thinking specifically about how we might build bridges to the heart of the family, keeping all of this in mind. We're going to take about a 15-minute break. I will let you know I'm going to be over at that table there by where John is. I do have some workbooks. I'll tell you more about the workbooks later. But I do have workbooks over there along with some samples of other resources. But I hope that during this break you will talk with each other about everything that we've already considered so that as we come back and we consider specific ways in which we might build bridges, we're primed for that. So a 15-minute break. By my clock, it's 2:40. We'll be back at 2:55. Okay, here we go. I have to tell you, your snacks look a whole lot better than most of the places where I go. You just have to know that. So we're gonna make a slight shift now. We're gonna get a little bit practical. And I'm going to invite you to think about this with me, and then I'm going to invite you to think about this at table together. We come back to that idea of building bridges. I want to tell you a real quick story about this slide because I think it illustrates something that we really need to be keeping in mind. I've been thinking about this bridge thing for a really long time, and in fact, 6-7 years ago, I was talking with people about the whole idea of building bridges and went through different iterations of all of this as I began to really read the studies and talk with people and work with parishes and dioceses and so on. But I find the older I get, the more visual I am. And so I started one day pulling pictures of bridges. And I had gotten it to the point where it was sort of looking like this. And for me, each of those images says something just a little bit different. And as I was kind of finishing it up and I was ready to get on with the evening and dinner and so on, my husband came and he stood behind me and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, well, I'm working on this thought about bridges, and so I'm just kind of putting together a few slides. And he said, well, like what? And I said, well, it's all about how we need to be building bridges to each other. And he just stood there and he went, And all of a sudden, and I am not making this up, I went, oh my goodness. He's a bridge engineer. My husband is a bridge engineer. I'm sure that this has worked on me subconsciously for a really long time. But here's the interesting thing. Once I thought about it through that lens, this took on a different layer of interest. Because I know that when Steve goes to design a bridge, they don't just go putting steel up. They have to think about how far down do we have to go to lay the foundation. They have to think about where is it that we're going? Where's our destination? What is the approach that we need to take? Sometimes there are things that are there that are givens that they cannot change. And they have to work around whatever it might be. Any of you from southern Indiana, northern Kentucky? There's a bridge that was built just a few years ago called the Milton-Madison Bridge. It goes between Milton, Kentucky and Madison, Indiana, across the Ohio River. And my husband was one of a huge team of people that designed this particular bridge. And in that situation, the next nearest bridge was 40 miles away. And there are people who live in Milton that work in Madison and vice versa. So they couldn't take down the old bridge until the new bridge was ready. And they had to leave it in essentially the same place because that's where the streets were. Those were givens. They couldn't change that. And so they actually built the bridge in sections, ferried it across the river, put the bridge together. Then they took out the old bridge and they moved the new bridge in place. If you just Google Milton-Madison Bridge, you'll find a YouTube video that shows a time lapse of them moving this bridge. I sent it to my friend Stephanie and she said, look how many people it takes to build a bridge. Yeah. But I think this helps us as we're thinking about our parishes and as we're thinking about each of us individually. As people of ministry, as we think about who we are and who we're called to be as builders of bridges, we need to think about who is it that we're trying to reach? What's the foundation that we're going to lay? What are the givens? What's already in place that we can build on so that we don't feel like we're starting from scratch? We couldn't if we wanted to, but what do we already have in place that we can build on? Where are we going? Where are we trying to lead people? I love the image of a bridge, not only because you know the word pontifex, from which we get pope, means bridge builder, but I love the idea of a bridge because a bridge goes both ways. It leads people in and it sends us out. And that really is who we're called to be as builders of bridges. We evangelize one another. We evangelize the people in our communities, and then we send each other out. Christ sends us out in mission to share the good news. Shortly after Pope Francis was elected, in one of his weekly addresses, he said, "The Lord made bridges. Christians who are afraid to build bridges and prefer to build walls are Christians who are not sure of their faith, not sure of Jesus Christ. Build bridges and move forward." Unfortunately, sometimes, and I think a lot of us as in our parishes, I think we've become much more conscious of this in the last few years. I think sometimes we've built walls unintentionally, but I think that there are moments where we build a wall instead of a bridge. And the challenge to us is to always look for, where is that bridge? How are we going to lead people one step and then another step and then another step closer to Christ through we who are members of Christ's body? And as we've already said in a number of ways, bridges are built person to person. That's the real reality. You know, no matter how many times we make the announcements at the end of Mass, no matter how many times we put things in the bulletin and on the parish website, it's that personal touch. It's that personal invite. It's that conversation over donuts after Mass or whatever it might be. You know, a real quick story, and I know that you all can replicate this story in dozens of ways. Years and years ago, one of the greatest privileges of my life was directing the RCIA. And we were always looking for those faith-filled people who would be part of our team. Not necessarily to teach, because I actually did most of the teaching, and our deacons and our pastor, and at the times that we had parochial vicars, they did the teaching. But as the people who would sit with our catechumens and our candidates at table and have conversation, those mentoring conversations, those mentoring relationships. And it happened that during Advent and Lent, we developed the pattern of having weekly evening prayer. And there was one woman in our parish, Colleen, who always came to evening prayer. And she always lingered afterward. She would help us pick up things and put things away. And, you know, and she always seemed to want to stay. She always seemed to be looking for that connection. And so finally one evening, I will tell you, I am like the worst inviter in the world. You know, I'm the one that'll say, I know you really don't have time for this, but would you think about it? Yeah, not my talent. But I finally said to her one evening, would you consider being part of our RCIA team? And she went, oh my gosh, why in heaven's name would you think that that would be something that I would do? Whoa. I said, well, you're a person of prayer. And I know that. And in the times that I've talked with you, you always seem to be making that connection between sacred scripture and our life of prayer and your life. And that's what we're looking for. And she went, And she said, do you really think I could do that? And I said, yes, I really do. But, you know, I don't want you to feel any pressure. You just think about it. And she said, you know that I'm a single mom. I said, well, no, I didn't know that, but that's okay. And I said, how old's your child? She said, well, my son's, I think at the time he was like 13 or 14. I said, well, that'll be all right. I said, as long as, you know, you feel like you can have the time away. She said, you really think I could do this? I said, well, I really think you could, but you can try it out. Don't feel any pressure to make a real firm commitment at this point. So the next week she came back and she said, were you really serious? I said, yes, I was really serious. At this point I'm starting to think, I don't know, am I really serious about this? Well, it turned out she had in her mind that because she was a single mother, she couldn't get involved in the parish. What an amazing thing. But, you know, I think sometimes our people do get those ideas. And it's possible that someone might have built a wall at some point with her. And so I said, please come join us. She was part of the RCIA team for 8 years until she moved to a different city. Bridges are built person to person. Had we put something in the bulletin, and which we did occasionally, you know, if you'd like to participate in the RCIA, please call. If you feel called to help with the RCIA, please call. She had not seen that at all. It had not spoken to her in a way that said, this means you. Bridges are built person to person. So back to that engagement research, just really quickly, I think this is important for us to know. Nationally, among Catholics, about 16% of Catholics nationally are engaged. 16%. Now, there are those of us in this room who have said over and over again, you know, around here the 20-80 rule persists. 20% of the people do everything, the other 80% just come. That's not actually too far off the mark, because there's a distinction between involvement and engagement. Involvement can lead to engagement. And actually there are some people who are engaged who are not involved in the parish. They live their engagement out in the wider community. But by and large, those who are engaged are also serving within the parish community. About 49% of Catholics nationally are not engaged. 49%. There's some anecdotal research among the folks at Gallup that they have not yet published that says we have about 6 weeks to engage someone when they first come to us before they join the ranks of the not engaged. And it's harder to engage someone once they've become not engaged. It's not impossible. And I've actually worked with parishes in a number of different ways in which they're engaging people who have been there for many, many years, and now they're finally starting to connect in a meaningful way. But I'll tell you a really quick story about this from my own experience. 8 years ago now, my husband and I accepted a transfer. We had lived in Cincinnati for 23 years, and Steve was asked to move to a different city. We were actually gone for 4 years, and then we got transferred back. And it was in that time of the move that our daughter, who's the younger of our two, went to college. And so it also happened that that was the moment where we made this very prayerful decision that I was going to start writing and presenting full-time. That it no longer made sense for me to try to balance full-time parish work with all of this other stuff. So we moved, and we're empty nesters, and I started traveling. And so when I was gone, Steve was at home by himself. So imagine this. He called the parish and said, "Put me to work." He joined the Knights of Columbus because he wanted to serve with other men. He was invited to be part of their RCIA process because they found out that that was something that he had done in a previous situation in life. And one Sunday when I called from I don't know where and said, "How are things going?" he said, "I think I'm going to have to learn to say no." Imagine that. I said, "So what did you say yes to?" And he said, "I'm a 5th grade catechist." Whoa, okay. Turns out he still is a 5th grade catechist. That was the one that really, really stuck because he discovered something that he truly loves and feels called to do. So, I'll be gone sometimes because almost all parish gatherings and diocesan gatherings, most of them are on the weekends. So in the fall, I'm gone 5-6 weekends in a row. And then I come back. So not because of the parish that we were a part of, but because of me and my life, I quickly became not engaged. So much so that one weekend after Mass, Steve was going from group to group talking and had his little notepad out and making notes and, yeah, I'll call you and so on. And I found myself backed against a wall. I could not make this up. Arms crossed, foot tapping, thinking to myself, could we please just go home? And I realized that I'd become not engaged. It happened so easily. Now, because I got it, because I knew what was going on, I actually called the choir director because I'm a former minister of music from teenage years. And so I said, I travel. I'm not always going to be able to be at rehearsal. I'm not always going to be able to be at Mass, but could I just come sing she said, absolutely come. And she built a bridge. She built a bridge that was almost unbreakable. When I came to Mass after a long time away, and sometimes I'd just go and want to pray Mass, and she'd find me afterward and say, "Why weren't you singing with us?" She understood. And I'm so grateful for that because that got me through 4 difficult years of being away from the friends that I had met over a long period of time. But now we've got 16% engaged, we got 49% not engaged. That means we have 35% who are either cave dwellers or flower people. That's a lot of people. 35% of Catholics nationally either are only with us from time to time, or they're with us all the time and they're always complaining. And we feel their absence. And we feel their negativity. And we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to build that bridge. When actually what the research says is we do well to take a little of that time and attention and build up those who are already engaged and build on what is already engaging people, because that's how we're going to reach that 49% who are with us all the time, who just haven't set those deep roots. So right before the break, we described 3 different needs in big thought that people have. They have a need for a spiritual dimension. They have a need for a personal connection. And they have a need for the opportunity to contribute to the mission of Christ within the parish community and beyond it. 3 things. I'd like to suggest 3 big bridges that each of us can build as individuals and within our parish communities. And then, just for goodness, I'm going to suggest 4 more. But we're going to start with 3. And the first of those is welcome. I think we already can think about all of the different ways in which our parishes already are and can be welcoming to our families in all sorts of situations in their lives. I think most of us can immediately think of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 stories, memories of times when a welcome has made all the difference in the world. I'd like to offer a few thoughts about this. Something that Pope Francis said, again, early on in his papacy that just really stuck with me. He said, instead of being just a church that welcomes and receives by keeping doors open, let us also try to be a church that finds new roads, that's able to step outside itself and goes to those who do not attend Mass, to those who have quit or are indifferent. The ones who quit sometimes do it for reasons that, if properly understood and assessed, can lead to a return. But that takes audacity and courage. And it's that audacity and courage that really struck me, because I think we can all think in our minds of the vulnerability that happens on both sides of a real, true motion of welcome. Think about the people that you know, perhaps family members, perhaps children, or cousins, or siblings, or neighbors, or coworkers, who were born and raised Catholic, who are no longer actively participating in a life of faith. And we know that offering some welcome, some invitation, is a risky proposition for both of us. It's risky for us because we know we may get turned down. And we do get turned down. And we get turned down repeatedly. And we have to find a way to keep building that bridge. But it's also risky for the person that's thinking about perhaps coming back or coming for the first time, because they don't know what's that like. What is this going to mean? Am I going to be welcome, truly welcome here? What do I have to do? What does it mean to belong? What is the potential impact? One of the things that we did at my parish as a result of a discontinuation of a diocesan program around welcoming people back who had been gone for a while, we started a little homegrown thing that we called Open Door. An Open Door was really, really simple. It was 3 times a year, shortly after Christmas, shortly after Easter, and then in the autumn sometime, because, even those who don't have children or whose children are grown, there's something about September that feels like New Year's. Yeah. Vacations are over, life is getting into a different groove, and so usually in late September we would do an Open Door. And there was a real simple process. So an announcement was made after Mass for a few weeks before. We had posters out in the gathering space. We had things in the bulletin. And the announcement sounded a little bit like this: there's always an open door here. If you have been away from the Catholic faith for any period of time, or if you have thought about becoming Catholic, or if you just have questions that you would like to ask someone, there will be a group of people who would love to meet you and then we would state the time, usually after the last Sunday morning Mass, so roughly noon, in specific place. It happened that the very first time we did Open Door, it was during the Easter season. And we were celebrating First Holy Communion at Sunday Mass. And Father made the announcement at the end of Mass. And on Monday morning, I answered the phone and a woman said, I have been away from the church for over 40 years. And the only reason that I was here yesterday was because my granddaughter was receiving First Holy Communion. But when Father made that announcement, it felt like he was talking to me. So I'd like to talk with you. Really simple process. But what an amazing opportunity to welcome. Our existing parishioners, the ones who were there every single week, first of all, they loved that they could take the parish bulletin and give it to somebody else because it was physical, something that they could give and say, I noticed this in the bulletin and I thought of you. But I cannot count the number of parishioners who said to me, it never occurred to me that maybe I need to be welcoming my family member, my friend, my neighbor. And all of a sudden I realized that there's something that I need to be doing as well. Our pastor actually heard that message in real clear terms. And so the following Christmas, he started saying to people a number of weeks before Christmas, round about Christmas, we start having a lot of visitors with us. And some of them are your family members who come from out of town. But some of them are actually people who live in your neighborhoods. And they're connected to you in some way. And some of them you don't know. And they may actually even sit in your pew. They may take your spot. So please welcome them warmly. Extend your hand. Say hello. I always say, you never know when you extend your hand and you say to someone, hi, I'm Lisa. And that person may say, and I'm Jean, and I've been here all of my life. Where have you been? Right? Well, I'm still Lisa, and I'm still happy to meet you. When my husband and I moved back 4 years ago, we moved to a different part of town, so we're in a different parish. And it took me a little while to get connected to even one person beyond the staff. I knew a number of the staff members, and I knew the pastor, and. And so one Saturday evening, there was this woman that I had seen a number of times sitting in the same exact spot. And so I came and I sat next to her, and I said, is it okay if I join you? And she said, absolutely. And she said, what's your name? And I said, Lisa. And she said, I'm Diane. She said, what do you do? How do you explain what I do? I said, well, it's kind of like I do a little bit of almost leadership training in the Catholic Church. She went, really? I went, yeah, really. And I said, and therefore I come and go a lot. I'm gone a lot of weekends. And she said, I'm going to pray for you. And every time I see Diane, she says, I pray for you every day. I can't tell you how I count on those prayers. It means so much to me to know that Diane's there, and I'm connected to her even when I'm somewhere else. What a blessing that is. And I think sometimes we forget what something like that means to the people that we touch. So we need to offer audacious and courageous hospitality. I think this is as much about who we are as what we do. Is that really taking to heart that we have a bridge to build? And we become very conscious of the people that we see. Those of you who are deacons, when you come out of Mass and you're standing in the back of church, I know it's just this sea of people, right? But you still probably recognize the folks who are regulars and the folks who aren't. And having that mind of reaching out to that person that you don't recognize or that you haven't seen a while. Maybe they're snowbirds. Either way, we get them coming and going, right? Depending on where we live. That opportunity to reach out. Those of you who are wives, you build bridges to your families. You build bridges to the people that you connect with in the parish. That simple who we are that says we want you with us. We need you to be with us. Invite people into the family. Think about that, what does it mean to invite someone into the family? We're not just going to dump them at the door. We're going to really help them to know our story, to know what it means to belong. The engagement researchers say it takes about a 4-to-1 ratio. We need 4 people engaged for every one actively disengaged. 4-to-1. Because you know what happens? Somebody comes into Mass, and maybe they've never been to the parish, or maybe they've been away for a while, or maybe they're just at that place in their lives where they're starting to say, God, there has to be something more than this. We want it to be a 4-to-1 chance that they're going to meet somebody like us rather than one of those fussy ones. That's what it takes. 4-to-1. And we're going to do that by building on what's already working, what's already building up the body of Christ, what's already engaging people. As my parish first started learning about that engagement research, we started having conversations in our parish meetings, and we held open meetings where we talked with people, and we invited them to sit at table and to simply talk about what helped you to connect. What helped you to really feel like you belong here? And maybe it was something different early on than it is now. And we started inviting people just simply to talk together and then to report back. I have to tell you, we weren't dreadfully surprised. We knew what the entry points were. A mom's group, a dad's group. We actually had a father's team. It's still there. A father's team that met at 6:03 on Friday morning because 6 o'clock would be just too darn early. 60, 70 strong. I would be coming in at 7:20 and they would be leaving. Hi, Lisa. Bye, Lisa. But that dad's group was one of the best early connecting points for the young families. The mom's group, the women's ministry. Actually, we had a group of men whose children were grown, and so they didn't really feel like they wanted to be part of the father's team, but they still wanted a men's connection. And so they came and they said, okay, we've watched the women's group. We had a group of women that called themselves Graceful Women. And Graceful Women met, seasonally. So they do like 4 meetings in the fall and 3 in the winter and then a spring tea. And it was women, so they had table decorations and they had music and they had food and then they did kind of themes. So, 4 meetings on mercy, 3 meetings on whatever. And the men said, we don't want table decorations. But we do want food. We'd be really happy if there was some drink. And so they started what they called MFL, the Men's Fellowship League. You're already hearing this, aren't you? The MFL met on Monday night, once a month. Yeah. Faith formation, time to talk, food and drink, and then they turned on whatever game was on. That was my husband's entry into the parish because he could talk with other men who were like himself. How do we build those ways of making that sense of hospitality so that people can connect in their stage of life and faith? And that means that we've got to work with the leaders of the parish, the informal leaders as well as the formal ones. We've got to make those connections so that those people who are serving with us see themselves as builders of bridges. And very often, those people who are coordinating groups, they're scheduling the hospitality ministers for Mass, they're catechists, they don't see themselves as leaders. And so we need to help them to recognize their role. And then we form the community as the body of Christ. One of the things that St. John Paul said that just has stuck with me in his pastoral letter at the turn of the century, he said to make the church the home and school of communion. That is the great challenge that we face in this time. If we wish to be faithful to God's plan and respond to the world's deepest yearnings, we need to make the church the home and school of communion. We live in a surrounding culture that is not communal. Being part of a community is hard for a lot of us. It gets messy, doesn't it? And so how do we form one another to really be communal people, where the community matters and where the community forms us as members of Christ's body? Second bridge, friendship. You know, we talk about relationship a lot. That's a scary word for a lot of people. So let's just talk about, how do we invite people to be friends? How do we invite people to connect in that person-to-person way? I've already mentioned a number of things. Fathers groups, moms groups, those who have children who are preparing for sacraments, those who are preparing for sacraments themselves. I do a lot of work with the Strengths Finder, which is a talent identification tool. I had the opportunity to meet with some engaged couples not long ago, and they had done Strengths Finder, so they had their list of their primary talents, their areas of talent, and they were talking together about their talents, and then they talked with each other in larger groups. What an amazing opportunity to evangelize family. If every person in the family begins to see him or herself as a child of God who is called to holiness, what a difference that could make to our families. So how do we do that? You know, there are lots of learning circles in our parishes. That spiritual needs survey really points to the way in which people are valuing adult faith formation, especially Bible study. Our people of every age want to know the Word of God. And so we build relationships around that. We build relationship around prayer. We build friendship through small groups of all different sorts. So how do we invite one another into friendship? Think about the parents of children who are preparing for First Penance and First Holy Communion. We always have that sort of obligatory parent meeting. But what if part of that parent meeting became talk with each other about the way in which you live your life of faith at home? I actually have done a workshop in parishes that I call How to Help Your Child Grow Up Catholic. And a lot of times it's that, all call, every parent needs to come, all of the whatever it is, second grade parents or all of the parents of confirmation candidates or whatever it might be. And it's very fascinating that once the parents get there, and yes, they do drag. It's been a long day for them. And they're looking forward to just going home. And so they come and they're kind of dragging themselves in. But once they get there and they have that opportunity to talk with each other about the challenges of being a parent, this is not an easy time for any of us to be family. They have that same experience at table that you all are having right now. They're saying it's so good to be with other people who get this. And the ones who aren't Catholic have that opportunity just to say, okay, I don't always understand what he or she is talking about. But now I sort of kind of can make a connection in the way that I can. I was offering a workshop in dioceses a few years ago around coaching parents. It was in over 45 dioceses in the span of about 2 years. And one of the questions that was asked was, what do you wish for? What do you hope for when you think of your families? That question that we started with today. And, there were a couple of consistent things. We wish that they would just come to Mass. That would be a really good first step. We wish that they could learn to prioritize. Our parents right now are really struggling with prioritization because it feels like everything's important. So what do we help them realize the most important things? That's really something that's a gift that we can give to our families. And it's very interesting because when we do that with and for one another, we realize that a lot of times it's not big stuff. It's little stuff. It's the little things that make a difference. And then thirdly, the third bridge, sharing. So we've had welcome. we help everyone to have a sense that they are valued, that we want them with us. We invite them to meet and to form friendships. We give them those opportunities to lift each other up, to hold each other during the difficult times. And then we help them to realize that Christ calls us to serve, that we are called to live as disciples and, to use that word again, as stewards. You know, a few years ago, I was invited to go to Australia and talk with people there about stewardship. I was gone for 3 weeks. And you can imagine the kind of preparation that goes into 3 weeks in a different country. We were meeting at all weird kinds of times of day and evening because of the time and day difference. I had sent all my slides ahead of time just in case. We had sent all the handouts and everything was prepared. And the very first gathering was up near the Great Barrier Reef in a little town named Townsville. If you ever have the opportunity to go, it's gorgeous there. And so I said to this group of Australian people, when you hear the word stewardship, what first comes to mind for you? When you hear the word stewardship, what first comes to mind for you? Money. Yeah. Maybe service, maybe responsibility, right? But in the minds and hearts of a lot of our people, we're still stuck on money. This whole group of Australian folks, however, said in chorus, agriculture. Because they've kept the original meaning of the word steward. The steward is the one who cares for the land or the livestock or the vineyard of another. And when we take that kind of meaning of stewardship to heart, we realize that all that we are and all that we have is gift. And it truly is entrusted to us by God. It isn't ours. And so if we help one another to realize that, bottom line, the first and foremost expectation is that we're all growing as disciples. And then the spirituality is one of stewardship. It's one of living faith. It's how we build those bridges between Monday to Friday and Sunday. And so we help our people to grow in gratitude and to live generously. We give them those opportunities, and we help them to put those first toes in the water. Years ago, as we were starting one of those women's ministries, one of the women said, you know, Lisa, whether you like it or not, everything that you put in the bulletin about adult faith formation sounds a little bit like this. Come, join our small faith community. We're going to meet every other week for the rest of our lives. She said, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone the rest of my life. And that's how they ended up with that idea about seasons, because people could commit to 4 weeks. Or they could commit to 3 weeks. They knew what was going on in their lives, and they could carve out that time. All generations of families together. And so we find those ways to invite people, to put those toes in, to engage, to come to that deeper sense of belonging. So another conversation, and again, not a long conversation, but just a little bit of opportunity for you to think about this, perhaps for about 10 minutes at your tables. And again, I'll call you back. What one thing stands out as something that likely contributes to the ways in which you're building bridges to families now? Could be an individual example, could be something that's going on in your parish, could be something that's happening in your own family. What's one thing that's already building bridges to families? And then secondly, how might you build on that for the future? Take about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to suggest 4 more real quickly. Lots of bridges to be built. I want to suggest 4 more. And again, I'm thinking big picture, because I know that, there's so many bridges that you all build. I think it helps for us to be able to sort of group them, to think of them more broadly, because it gives us that way of saying, what do we already have that we can learn from? The men learned from the women. The MFL came as a result of graceful women. The moms group and the fathers group learned from each other. We learn from each other in conversations like this, and a bridge that you're building now, someone else might go back and learn from. Sometimes we already have something in place and we just need to think about it ever so slightly differently. And it can make all the difference in the world. Something that we're already doing for our religious education families or our school families or our teens and their parents. And all of a sudden now we're going, yeah, but wait, there's so much else that we could be doing in a similar sort of way. So I'd like to suggest 4 additional bridges, big buckets, big groupings of things. The first I've already mentioned, and that's worship. There are so many different bridges that can happen within the celebration of the Mass, within the celebration of our sacraments, and all of the sacramental prep that's connected to that. All kinds of ways to help people to build those connections, those bridges between our life of faith and the rest of their lives. We also can build bridges just in the way in which we build community. My former pastor is fond of saying to people, we have to play together as well as pray together. We know the importance of just that kind of lighthearted stuff that happens. Years and years ago, we had a Friday Lenten series that began with fish fry, and then included Stations of the Cross, and then faith formation for everyone from age 3 up. And it was mass pandemonium. And especially the year that our fish fry was voted the best in the city. We didn't know that was sort of a mixed blessing, because we were already serving about 800 fish dinners, and all of a sudden we were serving 1,200 fish dinners. And thank goodness we had overflow space, and they were doing carry out, and we were doing shifts of people, and on and on and on. And it happened that one year we invited then Archbishop Pilarczyk, now retired Archbishop Pilarczyk, to be one of our speakers for our Lenten series. And after we had invited him and he had accepted, and we had invited him to come to dinner and he had said yes, then our pastor realized that he was not only going to be out of the city, he was going to be out of the country on vacation. So I became Archbishop's host for the evening, and we had agreed that we would meet over at church and then walk over to the fish fry together. And as we were walking over, I said, so Archbishop, do you do your own little kind of like best of series? Do you just go like fish fry to fish fry on Fridays? He said, no, actually, this is my very first. I said, ever? He said, yes. Well, really? Well, I'm so grateful that we're your first. And so we went in and we ordered, and then we sat down at table. And I always remember one of our deacons was actually walking through, milling around, kind of going table to table and talking and just being himself. That thing about being as well as doing, he was just being himself. And Archbishop turned to me and he said, nights like this could be really good for vocations. Yeah. Those connections that we make where we witness to the impact of faith in our lives. Those are bridges that we build to our families, to one another. We build each other up, and in the midst of that, we build bridges. So worship, connect, grow. The way in which we are formed in faith. I'm sure some of you lead Bible studies. I'm sure some of you lead the RCIA. How are we helping one another to learn and to grow in faith? The letters that you write for the bulletin, the ways in which you witness and form one another really is a bridge. Because we all need to be evangelized and evangelizing. That's who we're called to be as disciples. And then finally, and especially here, I have to say, service is a huge bridge. The way in which we invite people to serve with us side by side. And while we're serving, we're talking. We're building that bridge. We're saying, have you had that moment where that aha happened? Or someone says, I really would like to ask you to pray for me today. Or whatever it might be. The way in which we touch one another with the love of God, with the forgiveness and the mercy of Jesus Christ, the power of the Holy Spirit in our lives. What a blessing all of that is. Lots of bridges that we can build. Lots of ways in which we help people to make those primary connections in such a way that their lives are never the same, nor will ours be. We're living witnesses. That's who we are. That's who we're called to be. I want to share with you the story of this picture. While I was a parish staff member at Immaculate Heart of Mary here in Cincinnati, we went through this huge building project. We were in a church building that had never been finished. It had the reputation of being the ugliest church in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, and I'm not making that up. It was a concrete cinder block box. They had run out of money, so they didn't even put windows in. It had a flat roof. It had red carpet that had faded to a weird shade of orange. And the first third of the church seating were chairs that were upholstered in a different shade of red that had faded to a different shade of orange. Sounds like yeah. So we went through this phase of building and essentially tore half of the church building off and then rebuilt out. So it was such a drastic change that they actually used the rite of dedication of a new space when the whole thing was done. And one of the things that happened in the midst of all of that was that we were able to put in a large immersion font. And so we had this 2,200-gallon font in the gathering space of the church building. And it happened that very first Lent in the new space, one of our elect, Stephanie, gave birth to her first child, baby Sophia. And Stephanie and her husband, Dan, came to Father Jan and I and said, is there any way that Sophia could be baptized at the Easter Vigil along with Stephanie? So the first person in the font was Stephanie. And after she was baptized, she turned and Dan handed her baby Sophia. And she brought Sophia into the font, and Sophia was the second person baptized. And I have to tell you, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Father Jan, who is this very introverted German dissented fellow, says to all of us, are you sure you're okay? Because we have other people to baptize tonight. But what always strikes me about this picture is look at the people who surround them. Because that's who we're called to be. We are called to be people who draw one another to Christ and more deeply to Christ in the way in which we live our lives of faith. That's who we are as builders of bridges. We're called to draw one another to our Lord. The third person in the font that night was Sandy. Sandy was one of our first grade teachers in our parish school. And Sandy had been raised in a Jewish home. And she had actually waited for her parents to pass before she was baptized. And all she could talk about throughout the catechumenate was how she could not wait to be able to talk with the children that she taught about Jesus. And I'm not positive, but I think that little boy in the center of the photo, I think he might have been one of her students. What's up with this? I don't know. And that happens sometimes too, doesn't it? Yeah. We all have those moments where, what's up with this? I don't think God ever ignores. And so as we think about the ways in which we build bridges to the families who are part of our parish family, I hope we realize that each of us can have an impact as an individual. And certainly within our parishes, we can build those bridges and have that way in which we really touch people with the love of God. and with the mission of Jesus Christ. I want to tell you just really, really quickly. One of the things that I'm doing with a younger colleague is I'm writing a little resource that we're giving away for the Year of Mercy that we're calling Mercy Now. And if you go to CatholicLifeAndFaith.net, that's one of two websites I want to tell you about. CatholicLifeAndFaith.net has a tab on it that says Mercy Now. And if you go to Mercy Now, you can just download it. It's free. There are PDFs that are like bulletin inserts, one for each month. And then there's a separate file that has notes for catechists and younger adults and parents, all about mercy. And each month really kind of focuses on the Sunday readings and the time of year so that we're making some of those primary connections. So go to Catholic Life and Faith, download Mercy Now, and then explore all of the other things that we have there for you. Over on the table, I've got copies of 3 workbooks that a different colleague and I have written around building bridges. And we've got a separate dedicated website just for the Bridges Project. It's Bridge2, the numeral 2, bridge2faith.net. Bridge to Faith actually has a whole bunch of information that you can just take and use. There are live links to the workbooks if you'd rather get them there. The workbooks here are $15, and I wanted to give you this discount code so that if you want to get them and have them shipped directly to you, there's a discount code where you can get the books. On the Bridges site, there's a tab marked Bridges Resources, and under there's a tab that says Sample Materials. That's where you can go for that file that has the links to all of the different research, study, articles, and all of that. There also is a link there back to the Catholic Life and Faith site where the Spiritual Needs Survey and all of that information is. On both sites, there's a Contact Us button. That comes directly to me. There's an email there where you can ask me questions. I always tell people I'm really good with email. I'm not always as good with the phone just because sometimes I'm on a plane. But if you'd like to talk, we can always schedule time and then we can sit on the phone and chat. I'd be happy to talk with you about any of this. I think you have prayer coming, and I don't know if prayer is here or is it back over at Bellarmine. It's here. So I'd like to conclude at this point and give you all an opportunity to mill around. I'll stay over there for just a few minutes until you begin prayer. I want to thank you for this opportunity to be with you. I'll hold you in prayer, and I ask you to do the same with me. Thank you very much. God bless.